Though it did come out all the way back in February, The Assistant never really got on my radar until a month ago when the popular YouTube channel Red Letter Media did a short review of it, and from that point, I was intrigued. Not with the narrative as I clicked off the video after deciding I wanted to go in blind, but it was more the differing opinions towards the film between critics and audiences, as it was quite the divide. Now, there are tons of examples of this happening on both sides of the spectrum. Sometimes a movie is popular with critics and not with audiences, and other times it's the exact opposite. But in the grand scope, you have to keep in mind that Rotten Tomatoes and other film review websites at times aren't the most helpful in ranking a film's overall quality, especially in the past. I mean, remember a few years ago when DC fans were spamming 10 out of 10 IMDb scores for DCEU entries before they were even released, which in turn gave them scores up in the 9s when really those movies would go on to be both critical and audience disappointments. The good thing is that nowadays I don't really see this practice being done, and most scores on these sites do kind of reflect the general consensus. But this is a huge gap. I think the reason the film has as low as an audience score as it does was because of the promotional material, mainly related to the trailer. Now, I don't blame the tone of the trailer compared to the film's actual tone, as the trailer's job is to sell the movie in any way possible, but the intense thriller-esque presentation it gave off falsely informed many people, as in reality the movie is basically the opposite. More about that later. So after watching it, I need to ask, even with the misleading trailers, why are you guys hating it this much? Let's jump in. First off, I can't talk about this film without discussing the narrative and how it relates to current events. So the story takes place over the span of one day as we follow Jane, played by Julia Garner, an aspiring film producer working as an assistant for a major media mogul. And throughout her day, she begins to realize her boss's predatory nature towards younger females, predominantly aspiring actresses, as it becomes obvious to her that he is sexually harassing and assaulting them. She attempts to tell others, but soon realizes that most employees, from HR to her other colleagues, know about it but decide to turn a blind eye in fear of losing their jobs, which they then subtly encourage her to do the same. So a major producer who sexually assaulted women for years, with a good chunk of employees that worked at his company knowing about it but not speaking out, not because they wanted to but out of fear of being fired. Does that ring a bell?
You like working for bad guys? I'll show you, bad guy. Now you touch it. You know what to touch.
Banana!
Now, this movie isn't about Harvey Weinstein. It takes a lot of inspiration from his story, but overall it's not meant to be solely about him. Instead, the idea of a powerful figure in this film is to more or less encapsulate the bigger picture of what the Me Too movement was about, as this movie was basically born from it. But instead of focusing on the main people involved, or even in the midst of the allegations against the producer through the eyes of the assistant, it's instead taking place before any of this could happen. So pretty much a pre-Me Too era. A recent film it reminded me of was 2019's Bombshell, if anyone remembers that. And though they tackle similar issues, they are completely different tonally and narratively, to the point where both movies basically live on different planets, just the same as the marketing and final product. Now listen to me. The big thing you need to know when you're walking in is that this movie is slow. And I mean slow. That fast-paced trailer is the furthest thing from this movie's actual pace. The amount of detail and repetition shown throughout this character's day is so meticulously detailed that it feels very much like a documentary, and I think that was very much on purpose, as the film was directed by Kitty Green, who before this was primarily known for her documentary work largely focusing on subjects related to feminism, most notably with 2013's Ukraine is Not a Brothel and 2017's Casting Joan Benet, which I remember really liking when it first came out. And though this is her first venture into a fictionalized narrative, she still manages to convey a very documentary-like aesthetic through her visuals. This is best shown again through the film's very slow and detailed depiction of office life, from making coffee, ordering lunches, printing documents, and scheduling meetings. Doesn't that sound exciting? Well, surprisingly enough, it's not painstakingly boring, and it wouldn't have worked this well without Michael Latham's cinematography. Being one of Green's longtime collaborators, Latham's flat stack shots really express the mundane and boring reality of The Office, to the point where many shots do resemble something you would find out of a documentary, primarily a lot of the long shots. The camera rarely moves, but when it does, it's always a dolly shot sliding right, and the way the editing and lack of score complement the tone and camera work managed to put me in a trance that engaged me so much that when it ended, I wanted more. The film's very short, only clocking in at around 80 minutes, and I do think that was the perfect length for a narrative like this. There were no parts where I thought the pacing was excruciatingly slow, which I applaud them for, as again it's not the most engaging premise, but also there were no parts that went incredibly quick. So in short, this is a perfectly paced film. If it was a little longer, I do think the runtime would weigh on me a little bit, but thankfully that was not the case. The acting from basically everyone was great. The only character I wasn't much of a fan of was Noah Robin's role. Like, I get what they were trying to go for with him being this sort of lazy, dickish, yet kind of controlling assistant, but I just found him to be annoying and not in a good way. But besides him, everyone else was great. This isn't the kind of movie that has strong, powerful acting, as everyone's very subtle, but nonetheless, this has some of the best performances I've seen this year. Julia Garner was absolutely fantastic and brought so much to her role, not only through her conversations with other characters, but primarily through scenes where it's just her doing mundane tasks with no dialogue, as we really get to see how much this job means to her, but also the toll it takes on her personal life, best shown through the dad's birthday subplot. Now, I've never seen the series Ozark, which she's most known for, but I'm glad I was introduced to her through this, which brings me to the HR scene, aka the best part of the movie, as it is basically perfect. This is the scene where she attempts to report the abuse, and if this was competing for award season, this would be the big moment. But instead of going all out and acting all over the top to establish Oscar recognition, the scene still sustains the subtle tone of the whole film. It's very intimate, uncomfortable, and one of the best acted scenes I've seen this year. And Garner just kills it, as this is the most vulnerable we've seen her thus far, and as a result, we too feel just as helpless alongside her. But this wouldn't be like this without Matthew McFadden, who plays Wilcott, the HR guy, who, like Garner, is fantastic. He starts out nice, but as the scene goes on and the allegations start rolling, he starts to get more intense and evasive, which makes you go through all these emotions you have towards him, both positive and negative. And he is only in this one scene, so he sort of left quite an impression. But to sum up, this scene is just fucking great. Everyone else from Alexander Chaplin to Christine Forsyth were great and felt like real people, as they too allowed me to have a conflicted relationship towards their characters that fluctuated from both positive to negative. And on the topic of characters, one of the best aspects of the film is that we never see the producer, and the only time we hear from him is when he's talking to Garner over the phone. They decide to give him this gravelly, deep voice which could be seen as a little over the top, but I think it works quite well as it properly conveys him as an aggressive monster who always gets his way. You know, like the Goblin King from The Hobbit. And on the subject of assault, and this was ruined by the trailers, but I liked the subtle ways they show the producer's actions through the eyes of the assistant without blatantly telling us. From the checkbook scene, to the controlling way the other assistants tell her to write apology emails in an effort to protect her, to her finding an earring in his office. And though it's very obvious he is doing this stuff, which kind of eliminates any real mystery aspects, I think it's more effective this way and also more frightening. We follow this character around all day that we become an employee ourselves alongside her, and as she finds out, we find out, and in turn, we as an audience are put in the role of the real life employees that stayed silent for many years in similar cases when they knew what was happening. And that's why this movie is so effective. We didn't need a scene of her walking in on an actress giving him a blowjob to get the point across. They chose to go the route of what you don't see is more scary, and that's why this movie stuck with me. So to end this off, The Assistant is definitely the best film I've seen this year, and I will 100% be rewatching it in the future. I do admit it's not made for everyone, and if you don't know what you're getting into, I do suspect you could have the same experience as the majority of these people. But if you aren't intimidated by its pace, you will find it an incredibly powerful film that sticks with you long after the credits roll. So do me a favor and give it a chance.